I'm going to talk a little bit about intellectual property, so and specifically about trademarks. The reason I'm going to talk about trademarks as opposed to other intellectual property is because of two reasons. One, copyrights, though very, very valuable if you are able to acquire a valuable one, whether you've written a song or you've come up with a famous cartoon character or been the producer of a movie, that's unlikely to be an entrepreneur's starting point, right? You're likely, unless you're a cartoonist, which is great, and then copyright is extremely important, or an author, it's unlikely that someone who's starting a business is going to be as concerned about copyright. And then if you are, you're going to seek out that special knowledge for yourself to protect that creative expression. Patents are similar. Patents largely are going to be for folks that have some technological underpinning for their business. They are enough to fill an entire discussion as well. And that's largely what I do is write patent applications. But I think from a real general standpoint, while not everybody needs patents, everybody essentially has a trademark. And I'm going to give you some examples even on this really boring initial slide. So my name again is Ross Chaffin. And if you're looking at me on the camera, you can see that you might see I'm wearing blue jeans. I've got a sweater on. This is what I call in the post-COVID world dressed up for me. And so I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer that does business transactional work. I meet with clients, largely they're engineers and they're business owners. And so I have found that after COVID, nobody really cares. On our website, you would see a picture of me that is about 6 years younger, clean shaven and wearing a suit. And that presents a different image. Maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not. Maybe it's saying, look, I can occasionally dress up. But that image or this image is in itself a trademark. Just like anything that you do with a product or a business or a service that says, hey, this is mine, is a trademark. A trademark is basically the name tag of intellectual property. And it's something that really only has value if it designates the origin of those products or services. And so on the far side of this slide, you'll see my law firm's name tag is Tomlinson McKinstry. And if anyone's ever sat through a marketing meeting, you know what it's like when you try to come up with these things, right? Tomlinson and McKinstry, well, we're a law firm, so seeing two names together will tell somebody, okay, there's probably somebody named Tomlinson and somebody named McKinstry. They may be alive, they may be dead, who knows? But this is probably a professional firm. They may be accountants, they may be a financial firm, they may be a law firm, etc. But that's probably what just names would tell you as opposed to Coca-Cola or Apple or something like that. And then there's a logo, and that logo, which again, a marketing firm came up with for us, that logo looks like a tree, except it also looks like a flow chart, and it has little hexagons around the top for the tree, which gives a certain impression to folks when they come to our website. I don't know whether it's good or bad, right? But my idea of it is my little hexagon tree that's right there says, hey, look, there's something kind of growing and there's something growth-oriented about what we're doing, but it's also technical. It's not just an organic thing, it's also a highly technical thing. So even if you don't have a trademark registration, even if you have never considered filing for a trademark registration, and even if you don't really even have product names, I promise you have something that is a trademark that is associated with your business if you're running one. It could be the way that your storefront looks. It could be the way that you introduce yourself or the way that you interact with customers. Not all of those things that you might consider trademarks are protectable legally, right? So for example, if you go to Chick-fil-A, you know you're at a Chick-fil-A because the 17-year-old high school student who is serving you your chicken is going to say my pleasure when you say thank you. It's if you hear it, and even if you hear it from somebody who's a waiter at a different restaurant, you'll think, what I always think to myself is, when they were younger, they worked at Chick-fil-A. Because it's such a strong commercial impression. Now, you can't legally prevent other businesses from saying my pleasure or telling all of their staff to say my pleasure after a customer thanks them for providing whatever it is that business provides. And yet, it's a designation of origin. It creates a connection between that product, those chicken sandwiches in a drive-thru, and in that name or that thing or that, whether it's a look or whether it's some sort of customer service. So anyway, so we'll talk about things that can be protected. But first, I think it's important to take a real quick detour through maybe the richest trademark in the world, and that's Elon Musk. People have very, very disparate opinions of Elon Musk. A lot of folks think he's a genius and the greatest industrialist since Rockefeller. A lot of people think that he's sort of a charlatan who has faked his way with a cult of personality to his success. But there's no doubt that when Elon Musk gets on TV and talks about, hey, let's create a vacuum-sealed futuristic train, that people pay attention to it, and there's a reason for that. It's because he is his own trademark. So underneath Elon Musk, you have these trademarks of businesses that he owns, right? So I think that it's really interesting that he has worked so hard to promote the businesses names rather than the ideas. And here's what I mean. Tesla is not special in that it doesn't provide better products than other fancy electric car companies. There is nothing about Tesla that is particularly innovative, except that they market extremely well. And when people say, hey, I'm going to go buy an electric car, Tesla is almost synonymous with that. It's become a dominant market position. And so as a result, that trademark probably has more meaning to an average ordinary consumer than the price point of the vehicle, the features of the vehicle, etc. If somebody's going to go buy an electric car, the first question is, well, I mean, there is more competition in the market now, but it's like, oh, which Tesla are you buying? Twitter is absolutely, there is nothing about Twitter that is innovative in that it's this little micro-blogging site that's now become a news source, but it has a dominant market position. And so Elon Musk, for better or worse, and again, your position on that first trademark that we saw probably determines your position on your thoughts about Musk taking over this middle trademark here. But the fact that Elon Musk has identified that this, rather than going and starting his own Twitter clone, and there are plenty out there, and every time somebody does something to make somebody mad on Twitter, a big group of people says, we're done, we're going to go join whatever the other Twitter thing is. And it never happens. And the reason why, it never really takes. And the reason why is because of the dominance, not of the technology, not of how innovative it is, but because this mark causes consumers to go, okay, little micro-blogging news website, that means Twitter. It doesn't mean any of these other places, Mastodon or whatever the new ones are. It means this. And so Elon Musk, with all of his Tesla and SpaceX money, could have gone and started his own, but he didn't. And the reason why is because these trademarks have power. Now, I do want to point out really quickly that he's doing the same thing in other areas. And what I mean by that is he's got all these little businesses that he's really trying to put a stamp on by not doing anything innovative, but by saying, this is my company that's going to do this thing that anybody else could do. So the Boring Company, which is a great trademark, by the way. This is one of my very favorite trademarks that I've seen recently. The Boring Company, does anybody know what the Boring Company does? It's a Musk company.
Makes tunnels.
It makes tunnels, 100%, okay? So it's also got this great double meaning, right? Because it also sounds like, well, the company is boring, okay? But what the company does is it makes tunnels for the purpose of Hyperloop. Now Musk doesn't, as far as I know, have any true like Hyperloop, which is this vacuum-sealed mass transit method. He doesn't even have any of the companies that do that. I think SpaceX is involved a little bit, but really what he's doing is he wants to position himself to be like the folks that provided supplies to the folks going up for the gold rush. Those are the only people that made money in the California gold rush on average, were the people that were like selling bags of grain and mules to the miners who were in California during the gold rush. And that's what he's doing here. Now, again, my entire career have represented companies that dig tunnels, right? That's really my expertise is ditch digging and tunnel digging technology. There's nothing magical about what this company does. He's got a great trademark, and he's going to put his own trademark behind it. And so that in the marketplace a lot of times means more than what it is and how good and how quality the service is and how good your innovation is. So does anybody know what these logos are? Okay, what's the one on the left? Anybody know what that is? PayPal, absolutely. Anybody know what the one on the right is? Pandora, absolutely. Okay, great, yeah, great work. So these logos are an example of alleged trademark infringement. And so what happened, and this happened about 5 years ago, is Pandora in late 2016 rolled out new branding. And that new branding included this block P that doesn't have a hole in the P. And in trademark law, as we're gonna talk about here in a little bit, the key to figuring out whether or not you can use a mark that might share some similarities with someone else's mark is whether or not there's a likelihood of confusion between your mark and your designation of your goods and somebody else's. And on first blush, when I first heard about this case, my initial thought was, well, there's really not a whole lot of confusion here. PayPal is a peer-to-peer or a peer-to company, peer-to vendor payment software. It's sort of like, it's almost like mobile banking. It is, in a lot of cases, mobile banking and payment. Whereas Pandora is a streaming music service. And so there's really not a whole lot of likelihood of confusion between these, except maybe you'll be on your iPhone and you'll click the wrong thing and you'll get annoyed for 2 seconds and you'll go back and you'll click the right thing later. But what happened was Pandora, in order to pay for its services, one of its options for payment was PayPal. And it would place those marks close to each other on its website, and PayPal filed a lawsuit for trademark infringement, alleging that Pandora had infringed its trademarks. Now, you can imagine Pandora is a big tech player, right, or a well-known tech player at least. They're not very big. They're certainly dwarfed by PayPal and Google and all the folks that are behind PayPal. But Pandora still is a name that people know, and you would think, well, they probably spent a lot of money on their branding to come up with that really fancy P over there. And pretty quickly after this lawsuit was filed, though, Pandora changed their mark to something like this. Now, I've been through their brand standards with Pandora's new marks, but my favorite part is the brand standards explicitly say you can use all sorts of different colors. You can do all sorts of different things with our P. You can, we want to see this P everywhere, but do not use blue or a blue gradient logo, okay? And I can tell you that when a company does that, when they say that there's a specific color we don't want, right? They're doing that because they've got some sort of agreement with someone else that there's a potential likelihood of confusion, and they're trying to avoid that separation, or they're trying to avoid that confusion that might happen, and they're trying to avoid, frankly, having to pay damages to a big player like PayPal. So anyway, so now Pandora, at least on my phone, it's this really kind of pink and red and blue circles inside the P, and they, on their brand standards on their website, say very specifically that you cannot use the mark that was the mark that PayPal alleged was too confusing. So if Pandora, again, a company that should have a lot of resources at its disposal, should have, San Francisco, I don't know exactly where Pandora is based. I'm guessing Silicon Valley. So I would guess that they have Silicon Valley in Bay Area based IP attorneys. If they can run into this sort of problem where they pay a bunch of money for somebody to rebrand them, and then a few months later, they have to do it again, right? Then your businesses can have that happen too. And it's important when you are thinking about how you're going to present yourself to the world, how you're going to market yourself using a trademark, to try to do things that will anticipate the problems and differentiate yourself from others. Now, that's not just to avoid lawsuits. So it's easy. People come to me sometimes and they'll say, well, Ross, can you do a search? I want to make sure that if I use this name for my product, that nobody's going to sue me. Well, not getting sued is a good goal, but it's not the only goal you should have when you're trying to figure out what mark to use, because you don't want to have an association with somebody else. As soon as you have as soon as you create an association with somebody else, number one, potentially lawsuit. Number two, you may find that that's not a good person to have an association with. And you don't have any control over the way that those folks conduct their business. And if you wind up having an unintentional or intentional association with some other person's mark, and then something bad happens to that person, now you might get brought down as well. The other thing that I'll just caution you on, and we can talk about the ways to avoid it, but I have recently had some discussions with some folks who I suspect were asking me a bunch of questions about trademark infringement because they wanted to create an association between their product and a famous mark. And they were trying to, the best way to say this is, potentially trying to get the, hey, how do I defend myself against this person who I'm trying to create an association with when they come and tell me to stop? And the answer to that question is, don't do that. Because I promise you, if you're the junior user of a mark, and you at the very beginning, before you chose what your mark was, were thinking, I want to make it look like PayPal. Now, I don't think that's what Pandora was doing, but if you say, hey, I want people to confuse me with PayPal because I think that'll help me. I'm going to call myself, Pay Buddy, and I'm going to have a P and a B, and they're going to look great. And somebody's going to go, look, it's the knockoff PayPal. I'm going to use them. Well, you're just asking for trouble, because one day, even if nobody sues you, I promise you what's going to happen, because it's always what happens when one of these big companies comes along, or even a moderate-sized company with a good trademark. They're going to say, all right, we're not going to make you pay us a bunch of money, but you've got 3 months to change your mark. Well, now you're paying a bunch of money. You're not paying it to lawyers necessarily, or to a competitor, but you're paying it to marketing people. You're paying it to people who are printing your materials, printing signs, all of that sort of thing, and then running some sort of PR campaign so that people know that Company A is now Company B, because most of those fights are not worth fighting. Anyway. All right, so here's a few others that have been really interesting, and maybe, I don't know if anyone's seen any of this, But your mark doesn't have to be a logo or a name. Your mark can be stripes on the side of pants, okay? So this is hard, right? Because stripes on the side of a tire is not what you would call inherently distinctive, because in order to be entitled to some sort of protection, your mark has to be distinctive, meaning that it can't just, as we'll get into later, describe what it is you're doing. It can't just be another word for what it is you're doing. It has to have some distinctiveness, but you can acquire that distinctiveness if you use that name for a long time or you use that feature for a long, long time. And in fact, that's what Adidas has argued that it has done. Adidas has said, you know what? We've been out here for so long making clothing that has these stripes on it, that when people see 3 stripes on the side of soccer pants, they don't go, oh, that's a cool fashion. They say, that's Adidas. That those 3 stripes that you might see on a sleeve or on the length of shorts or pants indicate the origin. It's a name tag, right? It says, this belongs to us. And so, when Forever 21 started selling these really great looking Ninja Turtle shirts and Bugs Bunny shirts, right, that had 3 stripes on the sleeves, they tried to argue, well, no, it's just a design feature. It's just our creative expression. It's one of many ways you might want to make your shirts. And Adidas argued, no. We have a registered trademark. And clearly that is shown there. And then, the case settled. But I could just imagine what the evidence in this case would look like. It would look like Adidas going and getting a bunch of people from off the street in a focus group and videoing them and saying, who do you think manufactured this shirt? And seeing how many people would immediately go, well, that's 3 stripes, it means Adidas. All right, sometimes it's easy to spot trademark infringement, okay? There are a lot of times where, Straw Buono coffee that's actually a coffee shop in Malta. And it's one of the more egregious ones, but Starbucks is a good example of a company that there's nothing special about Starbucks except for marketing. And the fact that just like if it were McDonald's or a place like that every time you walk into Starbucks, you know what they've got on their menu, but it's not as if their coffee is any cheaper or better than the coffee shop around the corner, but they have very, very strong brand protection all over the world. And in fact, we're able to sue this group in Malta. But if you look at the way that coffee companies brand themselves, a lot of times they use this logo here, right? Where you have the name and maybe an establishment date in a circle that rings around some sort of logo. Here, this is a lion. I think that Starbucks has like a mermaid or something like that in the middle of their logo. And though even those design features on a logo can implicate trademark law, because especially when you're trying to suggest a association with Starbucks or a big brand like that, you can get in trouble. So this Super 7 that's down here, there was actually a decision on this in 7-Eleven won a trademark infringement lawsuit. And what's interesting is this is one where no consumer likely thought after going into a Super 7 that it was a 7-Eleven. And that's because this Super 7 company sold shoes, all right? And so you don't probably, an average consumer isn't going to say, well, a gas station, convenience store is going to also spin off another business that's going to be a discount shoe store in a strip mall. They're probably not going to do that. But the initial interest and the strength of this mark, so the 7-Eleven mark was viewed to be so strong because of the elements of the branding and how every corner in America has a 7-Eleven on it, that even though a lot of the other things that you would think of when you start analyzing whether or not somebody's going to be confused, even though a lot of those things were weak, that similarity was so strong and this mark was so famous that the Super 7 mark was found to infringe. All right. Sometimes the issues, though, are a little bit more complicated. So I don't know whether or not anybody has seen these shirts that take a mark and make it into something else. The example I always think of, because of the circles I grew up in, is that there would be these t-shirt stores that would sell these like religious shirts that would somehow depict Jesus. This one has him with the cross. Sometimes it shows like ripped Jesus. And around it would say Lord's Gym, right? Which is literally just playing off of this logo. And I would see it like with Sunkissed or with some other famous marks that would be taken, and they would be either a church group or a school group or something like that. And the comment I'd get from people is, well, you know, you're not going to confuse this at all. Yeah, but you're selling t-shirts on the strength of that mark. And so why, and you know, so somebody might say, well, but it's for a good cause, right? We're selling this t-shirt and we're giving a donation of our proceeds to a church group or a charity or something. Well, yeah, but you're doing it on the strength of that mark, and they don't get to decide when you do this, because this is a name tag, right? This is nothing other than a name tag. They don't get to decide when you do this how you're using it. You're taking their name and likeness and that sort of thing, and you're applying it to whatever you think is good for you. And so I see this happen all the time, and the answer is always no, right? The answer is always no. People will do it anyway because they're going to sell, 3,000 t-shirts, and then they're not going to have any more t-shirts, and Golds will never find who sold the t-shirts or whatever. This one, however, is one of my favorite trademark issues of all time. So in St. Louis, Missouri, there were some smart aleck kids, and I think that they went to like the Washington University there, but I'm not sure of that. And they thought it was funny. This was like the late 2000s, early 2010s. They thought it was funny how these North Face jackets were just ubiquitous. Everybody had a North Face, and but there was nothing special about the jackets. It was just a brand, just like anything else. And so they decided that they were going to parody the North Face brand, because when they turned the little mountainside upside down, it kind of looked like a backside. And they just said, okay, well, it's the opposite of the North Face. We're the South Butt, because parody is protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, right? And so they thought, hey, we're going to make we're like Weird Al Yankovic. We're like The Onion. We're like The New Yorker. We're out there, and we're going to parody the North Face, and we're going to sell jackets. Okay. Unfortunately for those kids, this is again, very, very, very funny. IP lawyers thought this was hilarious. Also doomed to failure. Because while you do have a First Amendment right to self-expression, that doesn't extend to the designation of the origin of products. And they are still, even with the parody element here, parody applies more to copyright infringement and not to trademark infringement. Even with the parody element of this, the South Butt is not allowed to take the design features of the North Face and compete with them commercially. And in fact, even in trademark or even in copyright law, that's true. You can't, like, you can sell your parodies, but you can't replace the thing that you're parodying in the marketplace. If you do, fair use a lot of times won't apply. Here, clearly the South Butt was trying to replace them in the marketplace for, I guess, the ironic people who needed coats. Funny story, a partner of mine went to a meeting at the United States Patent and Trademark Office soon after this case was decided, and the examining attorney that he met with was wearing a South Butt jacket at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. All right, some other real quick ones that we'll go through, some other strange things about trademarks. You can't disparage anybody through the use of a trademark. That's the Washington Redskins case. A cancellation was filed against the Washington Redskins because the allegation was that the mascot in the name Redskins was disparaging to Native Americans. It was an issued trademark. Okay, so this trademark had existed for decades and decades. The office and the court said, "You're right, that is disparaging," and they canceled the trademark. And you can imagine now you have the Washington Commanders, for a while was the Washington football team. If you're an NFL football team, even if you really, really, really want to continue to use the name Redskins, once somebody says you don't have a trademark anymore and you can't stop somebody from going and infringing that because we find it to be disparaging, then you want to be able to sell paraphernalia of your team without other people being able to come alongside you and sell that same paraphernalia, so they quickly changed their name. Because once you lose that right, and once basically there's a decision that says you don't have any right to stop somebody else from selling something with this on it because we don't think that it's worthy of protection. That's essentially what the U.S. court system did. So they changed their name. On the House of Cards, there was a case involving the Netflix show, the distributor of the Netflix show House of Cards, where there was another company that made games and videos for that used that name, and the problem was that House of Cards, the TV show, knew about this. They knew that they probably had an issue, and they did it anyway, and they got dinged. Then in this part of the country, the most famous trademark issues that we have around here are that the University of Oklahoma, every time it sells products that look like this, which they can do, okay? People can sell this. Does anybody know the hitch? If you're going to sell that product, or a T-shirt or a hat with that on it?
Does Texas get a cut?
Yep.
Oh, man.
They do it under license to the University of Texas. And so anytime, or it's unlicensed in trademark infringement. But so there is a standard licensing procedure for the University of Texas. You can go and pay them their standard cut. You can do whatever you want with those Longhorns, but you gotta give them their money. All right. So one of the goals that I think that we all have when it comes to trademarks is we want to be distinct, right? I use this example all the time. These are businesses that literally coexist and nobody has any issues. This is not trademark infringement, but it can be kind of confusing. Especially this Fox up here. That Fox, I think they try to make it look like the network, right? But that's Fox Collision Center, and what their name looks like. There's Fox News, Carfax, which has is the mascot for Carfax, and then Fox Racing. So sometimes, when this happens, when there are lots of marks that coexist, that makes your mark weaker. So every time a new Fox comes around, and of course Fox is not so inherently distinctive by itself because it's the name of an animal, that it's entitled to much protection. But every time there's a new thing with Fox on it, Fox gets weaker. And so when the big boy Fox, right here, the Fox Entertainment Company that has 20th Century Fox and Fox News and Fox Sports and all the different Fox entities, they have to use other things to make their mark more distinctive. Certainly, I don't think anybody could use this logo in the news and entertainment space because I think that's too close. But at the same time, it's different than if somebody called their collision center Coca-Cola Collision Center. That mark has no real competition. Nobody's out there calling their stuff Coca-Cola except for Coca-Cola. So I think that there would be more likelihood that a average ordinary consumer would drive by the Coca-Cola collision center and go, look, well, shoot, they make soda pop and now they're into fixing my cars. So that's a whole lot more likely than somebody going by Fox Collision Center because the mark isn't as distinctive and there's more of a crowd, and going, oh, that must be Sean Hannity's Collision Center. They're not going to do that. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this at all because lawyers are required to show a slide with a block of text that shows the actual legal standard, and it makes the presentation less interesting. But I have to do it because this video is going up, and somebody's going to go, well, he didn't really go into the real details of what's going on here. Well, when you are looking at whether or not your mark infringes someone else's or whether someone else infringes your mark, there are these 8 factors because courts love to make lawyers do work. And there are these 8 factors that you have to consider that are numbered here. You can look at those things, but what it really comes down to is how likely do we think it is that somebody's going to get confused? And all of these things, the strength of the mark, the similarity of the marks, the infringing product's competitive proximity to the registered owner's product. That's a great term, competitive proximity. The likelihood that one day Coca-Cola will decide, hey, we want to start fixing cars, right? That's important, and that's a good kind of. I work in an industry a lot of times where they're digging tunnels, right? And in Oklahoma, you have 2 different kinds of tunnels that are being built by these people. One of those kinds of tunnels is like hey, I need to install a pipe that's going to go into this new subdivision, or I need to put a new utility line underneath the driveway. Okay, so you're talking about a hole that is 3 feet underground and maybe 2 inches in diameter. The other kind of hole that gets dug a lot in Oklahoma, and a lot of Oklahoma companies are involved in, are the ones that go, a mile down, and in 3 miles that way in the oil and gas production world. And so there are products that will service both of those industries, even though those industries themselves are very different. The companies that build the drilling machines, right, that drill down to go get oil or to drill in your neighborhood to put in a new fiber optic line, those companies don't compete with each other at all. But the companies that might make drilling fluid that would work with both, that would soften up the area so that you can drill more easily, probably do. So there are places where that sort of moving into that market will make sense. 5 is actual confusion. I mean, people will always go and they'll try to survey people for these cases. They'll survey a big group of people and say, oh, are you confused? And if you're lucky and you get people who are really easy to confuse, then it'll show infringement. If people say, I'm never confused. So, I mean, I think that's actually fairly unreliable evidence unless there's, lots of folks trying to buy a product from the wrong person. I think that's better evidence than survey evidence. The infringer's good faith, I mean, every infringer is going to say they act in good faith, but it is important to show, hey, look, I wasn't trying to do this. The quality of the alleged infringer's product. Now that's interesting. I think that what that gets to, I've never really seen that be dispositive, but I think that what that really gets to is this really a knockoff? Is it really counterfeit? And then the sophistication of the buyers in the relevant market. Obviously, if somebody's going to pay $1 million for a piece of construction equipment, they're going to pay more attention and they're going to be harder to actually confuse, right, than somebody who's buying a soda pop, right? This person who's buying a soda pop, they're just going to go, oh, look, there it is. It looks like Coke, so I'll buy it. What I want to talk about to kind of wrap this up and to kind of give you guys something to take home as you're thinking about trademarks is this question of the strength of the registered mark, okay? Because I think a lot of times there is this tension where folks want to say, hey, my logo, I am, my mark is Ross Chaffin Law Firm, because that's what I am, right? I want to describe what it is I'm doing because I don't trust my consumers to figure it out, right? And that a lot of times these marks will come in and they're like an acronym that's really extremely complicated, but it's, it's right on the nose. And unfortunately, those are a lot of times the weakest marks. It's not a bad thing to suggest something about your mark by using your trademark itself. I think Chick-fil-A is actually an interesting example of we'll go through some examples, but an example that we've just talked about of a suggestive mark. It's not chicken sandwich shop, but it still pretty much says, hey, we're selling chicken fillets, right? Anyway, so the further away your mark is from what it is you do, the stronger it is under trademark law. So these are some examples of what every one of these, and I just put them in these little circles, but every one of these used to actually be a registered trademark, and I think aspirin may still be, but I don't think that I think that if somebody called their product aspirin, it might be hard to actually defend it. Because these things, which actually, if you think about it, there's nothing about any of these names. Teleprompter, right? It's a screen that tells you there's no reason why that had to become ubiquitously known as a teleprompter, but it has. And so now, right, when people say, oh, it's a teleprompter, you don't know who makes that teleprompter. You don't know what the brand is. You just know it's a teleprompter. Videotape, right? Well, I don't even know that people use videotapes anymore, but initially videotape was a trademark, and then everybody just called them videotapes. Bubble wrap is a funny one to me because I think that one is still asserted too, but I'd be shocked if somebody was like, hey, come get my bubble wrap. And it's really, it's packaging material. But anyway, so these marks are examples of what really would have the least power associated with their name, because they just literally, it's like if you were a chair company and you're like, this is chair. Okay, well, yeah, that's the thing. Okay, here are some descriptive marks. Okay, so descriptive marks merely describe the actual company, but they may do it with a little bit of distinctiveness, okay? Here's what I mean. United Airlines was created by the uniting of and I forget the airline companies that merged to create United Airlines. Continental and United, there we go. So United Airlines literally is describing their company here, but their mark has acquired distinctiveness such that people know what it is. And if someone were to come out and say, hey, I've got a United Airline company, I've got United Airways, and United Airlines wanted to sue them for trademark infringement, even though their mark is descriptive, they could. Now, when you actually do this, when you actually file a mark that is descriptive, Bank of America is a great example. It's a bank in America, right? And in fact, American flags can't be trademarked. So that's another piece, is like you can't, apple pie, you can't go and trademark the American flag and keep other people from using it. That makes sense, right? Otherwise, you'd only have one patriotic company in a class of goods and everybody else is not patriotic. So Bank of America, Bank of Oklahoma, those are probably the two that are the same.
Technically they're not, but.
Okay, yeah. Well, and then Tinker Federal Credit Union is a federal credit union at Tinker Air Force Base. Those all are specifically descriptive marks, but you can acquire distinctiveness. And what you do is you use them and you promote them and you put a bunch of literature up saying, hey, this is what I'm doing and this is the mark. And eventually it starts to mean something and you get some protection in it. So suggestive marks don't necessarily go to the level of being descriptive, but they do have something to do with the products. These marks can be really effective if you're worried that you've got dumb consumers, right? that aren't going to know what you are if they see your mark. Because everybody's like had a commercial that they watched, like for the Super Bowl, and somebody's out there, and the Super Bowl commercial is all about like a little family, and then like the dad comes home and has been gone at war, and everybody's happy, and they reunite, and then at the end, you just get a trademark. And you're like, I don't know what that is, right? So these marks, you pretty much know what they are when you look at them. Mr. Peanut sells peanuts, okay? He's not it's not as if it just says, it's not just peanuts, it's Mr. Peanut. It has some distinctive features, but it's suggestive of what he is. Hobby Lobby is a good one locally, in that they are a place where you get hobby stuff. Chipotle, I think, is a really good one because it suggests Mexican food without actually coming out and saying it. Copper tone is an example that I think is really fun because it's like, okay, yes, I have copper toned skin after I put on the sunscreen. But it's not descriptive. It's not just about the sunscreen. But those still are not as strong as marks that are completely arbitrary and have nothing to do with their product line at all. Okay, so we'll talk about arbitrary and fanciful marks next, and these are, I guess you might say that there's a little bit in Whirlpool. There might be a little bit of a suggestive nature of it because you might look inside of a washing machine and say, it looks like a Whirlpool, but they also make refrigerators, and it certainly isn't suggestive of refrigerators. Apple is a super, super strong mark that has literally nothing to do with computers. In fact, it's a mechanical thing with a name that's organic. So that can be really good. Sprite, Tide, these are things that they really do exist. There is such a thing as a Tide, but it just doesn't have anything to do with laundry detergent. I like Target a lot as an arbitrary mark that also kind of tells your consumer something. It doesn't suggest a department store or a big box store, but what it does is it says, hey, here's where you hit the spot. You're here. You're right where you need to be. And then there's fanciful marks, and these are made up words, or words that are just. Devon is a place in England, I guess, but these are to the extent that they don't really have any meaning other than it's just a company name, and these names are these are the strongest types of trademarks, so long as you can keep your consumers on task. And I'll give you an example of what that is. But like Clorox doesn't have any meaning. There's no English meaning for the word Clorox other than it's a brand of bleach. Pepsi, Advil, lots of examples of this. However, fanciful marks, as with most things in the law, I've kind of presented these on here's the weakest version, it's generic. Here's the strongest version, it's fanciful. Unfortunately, like everything else, it's a circle. If you go far enough to one extreme, you kind of come back all the way around to the other end, because these are what I would call either fanciful or arbitrary marks that are in danger of becoming that first category, or maybe you already have, right? So Kleenex, you probably have all heard the story, Kleenex has to call themselves Kleenex brand facial tissue, because they're afraid that people will just refer to those tissues as Kleenex. EpiPen is a good example that just like, where's your EpiPen? It could mean, it doesn't matter what the brand is. It's the allergy stuff that you take if you're having an emergency. Frisbee. I didn't know that Frisbee was a trademark. Right? I had no idea that Frisbee was a trademark. And so work has to be done. Now, likely this is just academic, because if you're at this point where your mark is so ubiquitous that it's in danger of becoming generic and you're in danger of losing it completely, then you've been successful. Great job, right? Right? Everybody would like to have this major problem. But I do think that Uber, as being a really relatively new company compared to some of these others, I think that Uber is one where there is some risk of it becoming genericized, because people don't say, hey, call a rideshare. Some people do. People won't necessarily say, go call a rideshare. They'll say, go call an Uber. And they don't care whether that Uber is a taxi or a Lyft or anything else. That's just kind of become the word. And so you got to avoid those becoming generic. So let's take a pop quiz. And so I'd love to get comments on some of these. There'll be known trademarks. We can talk about how strong they are based on, again, whether they're, again, suggestive, descriptive, arbitrary, whatever. What do we think about Chesapeake Energy?
Descriptive.
Descriptive? Why is it descriptive?
Because it's It's Chesapeake Energy, and that's what it is. They're an energy company. I guess maybe not because of the Chesapeake part.
Okay, I agree. Okay, so energy, if they went and they tried to get this trademark, I'm sure it is. When they go and register this trademark, I'm sure that they had to say, we disclaim any exclusive right to the word energy because we're an energy company, right? You've got to do that sort of thing. If you say, we maybe even, I'm not sure if we did that with audio for DD audio, but like we can't, you're not, you don't get the exclusive right to use a word like that, especially when the product is here. In this case, they're doing exploration for oil and gas. But what about the Chesapeake part? Any thoughts?
Arbitrary.
I agree. I think that it's arbitrary. It's an actual place name, but it's a place name that doesn't really have anything to do with what Chesapeake actually does. So if they were something like, if they were, shale formation energy or something like that, then maybe we would get into the descriptive world. But Chesapeake Energy is probably arbitrary. Well, this one.
Suggestive.
Suggestive. Why suggestive and not descriptive?
Oh, wait. Maybe
It's not a literal
just
hut, though.
Okay. I mean, I think I agree that it's suggestive.
because it's pizza. It is a hot dog. They have that roof line. All their buildings.
So
Maybe not anymore.
what I think this might be is descriptive because it is kind of a hut, right? Now, it depends. It may depend on which products you're actually getting from them as to whether it's descriptive or suggestive. Pizza Hut delivery services for pizza is probably suggestive. Pizza Hut as a place that you go and eat pizza might be descriptive, especially because they work really hard to make their, you can tell when something's an out of business Pizza Hut when you're going by on the side of the road, right? Which again, that's a good designation of your goods. That's a good job that they did. Unfortunately, when they go out of business, they kind of are ugly and can't really be used for a whole lot else. But I think but if it is descriptive, I think that it's acquired distinctiveness, obviously, because it's been used for so long. It's got a strong association with delivery pizza or fast food pizza, a place you can go and get pizza, a chain. Okay, what do we think here?
Suggestive.
Okay, I think I agree. What do you think about the name, though? Any thoughts here? It's good? Why?
Because it gives you feeling of safe.
Sure.
Like you can trust these people.
Sure. Okay. So one of the things that we try to work through on names like this, say first of all, I think that this has a lot of design elements that are really cool. Like for example, the snowflake on the eye and the colors. It's a cool logo. This is one of mine. But one of the things that is interesting about a name like Integrity is that it becomes hard to tell somebody else, well, you can't say that you have integrity because I said that I have integrity. It's almost like it's a puffing statement. Like if I said I'm honest legal services, right? And then somebody else wanted to say that they had honest legal services and I said, no, trademark infringement. Well, that's kind of tough to do because really I'm just trying to puff or describe my services. Now, I think that the other piece of the puzzle here with a name like this is it is a word that doesn't really have anything inherently to do with heating and air services that you can can create some differentiation in a marketplace, especially in a small metropolitan area. Unless you've got a large service chain, most of these companies are regional. All right, I love this. This is a great one. What do we think?
Arbitrary.
Arbitrary? Okay. Anybody think it's suggestive?
I think it's suggestive.
Why do you think it's suggestive?
Because they're marketing like a party on your cruise. It's like,
Yeah, I think it's suggestive. I think if it were, I think that that it's interesting because it is, there's nothing about a carnival, right, that seems glamorous. Carnival kind of cuts against some of the pictures of cruises.
well, it's actually super descriptive of the industry, really.
Maybe. It probably depends a little bit on what you think about cruises. But, so Carnival's been around a long time. They're the parent company of a bunch of other cruise companies like...
They're the largest in the world.
They're the parent company of Princess, which is another big mass market cruise line, which has a completely different clientele than Carnival, right? Because what Carnival likely is trying to do, and I haven't been in their marketing meetings or their trademark meetings, but what they're likely trying to do with this name is, especially initially, was to try to differentiate their line from these stuffy old people lines. And they're like, hey, come here, we're not going to put on any pretenses, we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to have water slides and jungle gyms, and it's going to be more of a party atmosphere and a casual atmosphere than, you know, the Queen Mary, right? So, but I think you're right. I think it's suggestive. This is another one of mine. Great mark, by the way. This has been around a long time. So does anybody not know what Ditch Witch does? Okay, Ditch Witch, they sell these, basically they move dirt from underground. So they sell trenchers that dig trenches of all sizes, and then also horizontal boring machines that might, so basically you want to put in a sprinkler system or a gas line or a fiber optic cable. That's what they do. So the big kind of like horizontal drilling machines you might see on the corner in your neighborhood, or a trencher that you might use to put in a sprinkler system. Your thoughts?
Arbitrary?
I think there's elements of both.
Like, yeah, because the ditch, you know, I mean,
Like a lot of their core products literally just make ditches.
Right. Right. I agree.
So that's descriptive, but I mean the witch parts, I mean, it's just it rhymes.
Well, and a witch does magic,
Oh yeah.
right? And so how do you make your ditch show? How do you make your ditch appear? You use a ditch witch, and the ditch witch makes it appear like magic. So basically their products started because they didn't, you know, they replaced shovels, right? That's what they were initially replacing. And so, yeah. If you're digging a ditch, now you've got your ditch witch that will make it appear like magic.
Are they in danger of becoming generic though?
I don't think so. So, in some of that's market share, but I also think that people don't call, at least in my experience, the competitors' products. So, you know, there might be competitors from Vermeer, who's a big ag and construction company. I don't think that anybody would call their products that compete with ditch witches ditch witches.
For people say you just need to get a ditch
Go
witch.
get a ditch witch. That's right.
I know they don't
I've
mean-
heard that plenty, and they're not, and it's just like we just need a ditching machine or a
trencher.
directional drilling or whatever. It's like we need to get ditch witch out here.
I think
It's like
that
let's get some quotes on some different brands, whatever.
yeah. Well, and frankly, that's true of this. That there could be some generic elements to it, and there probably were. It probably was more true before there were all these competitors in the space.
Well, yeah, and I think it's just ubiquity, maybe is the word you used. It's just that they've done such a good job of putting themselves in the market that
Right.
when you're talking about the types of products that they make.
Right. Well, it's like, okay, has anybody ever seen on like social media, they'll have those maps of what people call soda pop, right? And I use soda pop very intentionally is what I'm saying there. They'll have a map of the United States and they'll say, okay, what do you call a carbonated beverage, right? And some people will say, well, I call it soda, or well, I call it pop. Or in this part of the country, I think that we call them Coke, despite the fact that, you know, you may be that you're drinking Sprite or root beer or Pepsi or whatever. Those are just all different kinds of Cokes, especially in Texas. And I'm from southern Oklahoma, which is basically just North Texas, and that's what everybody called the soft drinks, called them Cokes. Okay, what about this one?
it's very arbitrary, except that it's our address.
It's more than an
But
address.
it's more than an address.
So you think it's arbitrary? I think it's suggestive. I don't think that's bad.
Yeah.
I think that it's suggestive of, you know, when you see it initially, you don't know what 3810 is. You're probably not surprised to find out it's an address. And then project, you know, may suggest that there's something about it that is a positive thing that a lot of people are doing together, right? Like a group project at school. I think it's probably right on the line between suggestive and arbitrary. Doesn't mean it's not a strong mark if it's either one. But yeah.
You haven't trademarked yet.
Well, and I'm not so, but, okay, so that's a good point. Registration is not required for all these things to matter, okay? So registration is good. Registration gives you coast-to-coast record notice. I recommend that if people care about their marks, that they register them. But this is a good example of one that, is very, very unlikely for somebody to copy. If somebody's going to copy this, what they're going to copy is the look of the logo, right? They're going to copy the project number idea. It's not going to be specific. And so, anyway, so just because something isn't registered or that you haven't registered your mark doesn't mean that it's not worth protecting. Now, sometimes registration is really important. I think that the Adidas stripes that we showed, the registration of those stripes really helped, right? That really helped them prove that they were entitled to protection, and it wasn't just a design element.
Yeah. I do think that even if you don't register right away, the research to make sure you're not competing in the space, and is this at some point going to be something I could trademark?
No.
Is important. And
Well,
it's definitely if you're going national or you have a product that you're.
Well, and I think the other question too is how much research you do. No lawyer is ever going to tell you not to do it, right? And I'm not going to tell you not to go in and look and make sure that your product has got clearance. However, I think that the level of attention that you give to it is really tied to how hard it would be to change it. So there are a lot of folks for whom the name of their store may kind of be incidental. They're the shop that's on the corner of Walker and 23rd Street, right? And people are going to come to that shop, whether it's Betty's Boutique or whether it's something else, because they know the owner, they know where it is, that's where they've always shopped. So maybe that doesn't matter quite as much. And maybe there you can have a descriptive mark, and because you're not looking to franchise Betty's Boutique or whatever. If it's going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of re-education of your customers in order to change your name and rebrand, then yeah, it's a really good idea to take a look before you get started, whether that's using a lawyer, whether it's doing it on your own. Now, again, lawyers are going to tell you, oh, you need a lawyer. You don't always need a lawyer. I think that if you don't want to spend the money and pay somebody's hourly rate, you can go to, and my advice on this has changed a little bit. So I don't think the USPTO, so that's the United States Patent and Trademark Office, I don't think their search tools are great. And in fact, I think that they've fallen way behind. However, and there's no guarantee that it's completely 100% up to date because they have to populate their information from somewhere else. But the World Intellectual Property Office, or WIPO, W-I-P-O, they have a brand database from all over the world that really is super logical to work with. And you type in the name, you type in some information about your product, and you put it in the right fields, and you'll learn whether or not you'll learn what sorts of trademarks exist. And it's a little bit more like a Google search. Now, again, I don't doubt that a lawyer can do that, more completely than an individual, but an individual can do it more cheaply. And in fact, if you record, hey, this isn't a get out of jail free card, okay? But one of the things that we talked about when we were showing this boring slide, right, was the alleged infringer's good faith, okay? Alleged infringer's good faith. Even if you don't go and find a lawyer to write you a big, long report in fact, that's what I'm going to do. When I leave here today, I'm going to go start working on a report for somebody's trademark to see whether or not that person has a problem, okay? But even if you don't do that, even if you don't want to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars to get one of those pieces of paper that doesn't really tell you anything, because the lawyers know how to protect themselves by putting at the end of it, none of this is a guarantee of success, and courts may disagree with my opinion, and you should not take this as a guarantee, and your risk may, That's what lawyers will do. I'll do it. Anybody will do it. But if you go to one of these websites where you can search for other brands, like the WIPO brand database, and you put in some searches and you print out what you've done, and you just put it in a file and you put a little memo to the file that says, hey, on December the 1st, 2022, I did a search because I wanted to make sure that there was some space, and this is what I did, and here's what I came up with, and I went forward. Does a pretty good job of showing a court, hey, this person maybe didn't hire a lawyer, but they did their best to show good faith. And if you get into these big knockdown, drag-out trademark fights, maybe it doesn't make the difference in whether or not you have to change, but it probably makes the difference a little bit in whether or not you have to pay a lot of money. It also may make the difference in whether it is a Polaroid factor, right? So it may make the difference in whether or not they find the likelihood of consumer confusion. Now, it's backwards to me, because what on earth does an infringer's good faith have to do with whether or not someone is likely to be confused? Nothing, right? This is there so that they can say, well, if somebody's a good guy, we don't really want to, it doesn't have anything to do with it. And so a court is always going to look at that and go, well, we've got evidence of either they're going to say there's evidence of their good faith and kind of skim along and make their determination based on the other factors, or they're going to say there's evidence of bad faith and they lose, right? It's never going to work in favor of an infringer, but it probably helps to lower damages, and it may help if you can show that good faith. And if somebody sends you a cease and desist letter and you're like, I spent hour and a half one day on the WIPO's brand database, they may give you 6 months to change your name instead of 3. And so it's a good thing. It's a good thing to do. Well, thanks so much for y'all's attention, and I'll be around afterwards to answer any questions that you have afterwards.